All right, welcome to another office hours conversation where we're having real talks about culturally responsive teaching in the arts context and how to ensure equitable access for all of our learners to high quality music and arts instruction by first making sure that our arts educators are well equipped with the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions that they need to ensure that they are providing instruction for the diverse and ever evolving needs of today's learners. So, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of the Office Hours. Today, we're going to get into how do we design music rehearsal and lesson plans the culturally relevant way. This is probably one of the I probably have like 5 or 6 questions that I get asked the most, and this is definitely one of those questions. And so I thought I'd dig into that a little bit during this office hours. So thank you for joining me. And if you're watching the replay of this, give me a hashtag replay in the comments. Let me know that you join. And I love for these office hours to be a conversation, right? So let me know your name, because if you are on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, I don't necessarily see, well, I definitely don't see your name unless you're on Instagram, but let me know your name. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Also, let me know what's your role in education. So I know in my audience, I've got music teachers, I've got visual art teachers, I've got some theater folks, I've got dance folks. I also have instructional leaders, principals, coaches, um, professional development designers, professional development coordinators, superintendents of instruction. So let me know what your role is so that we can all build a little bit of community while we're on for our office hour session for tonight. So I see a few people just came on. So let me know where you are, where you're tuning in from, what's your role, and things like that. But let's kind of jump into tonight's topic. Oh, actually, wait, before I do that, I don't want to assume that you know who I am. Maybe you kind of stumbled across this video after the fact, or maybe you were scrolling through your feed and I happened to pop up. So I don't want to assume that you know who I am. So let me introduce myself. My name is Ashley Cuthbertson. I use the pronouns she and her. And I am a former pre-K through 12 music educator and adjunct professor, and today the very proud founder and principal consultant of A. Cuthbertson Consulting. We're a national educational consulting firm that partners with schools, districts, and organizations to support their visual and performing arts teams. That's music teachers, dance teachers, visual art theater teachers, the arts folks. We partner to support those teams in order to help them to better connect with their learners so that they can create culturally affirming learning environments, implement equitable program policies, and then also, and kind of what we're going to get in today, I also help my folks to be able to design culturally responsive and relevant curriculum and instruction. So I want to make sure I don't forget to introduce myself because maybe this is your first time joining me for one of my office hour sessions. So like I said, join into the conversation. Let me know where you're tuning in from, your role in education. But let's go ahead and jump right into our topic for today's office hours. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to drop those into the comments. And if anything strikes you, give me a heart, a like, wherever you are. That helps me to know what's really resonating with you all. It helps us also to build community so that we know what each other is vibing with as I'm sharing. So tonight's office hours are about designing music rehearsals and lesson plans the culturally relevant way. Like I shared, I have like 5 or 6 questions I get asked all the time, and this is definitely one of them. What does it actually look like in my lesson plan, in my rehearsal, to be centering a culturally responsive and relevant pedagogical approach? And so the impetus for tonight being when I'm discussing this topic was a few weeks ago. I would call myself like a lurker in all the different Facebook groups and social media things. I'm often coming across people talking about all kinds of different things. Sometimes I jump in the conversation if I feel like I have value to add. Many times I just protect my peace and I keep on scrolling by. And so this was one of those instances where I thought, let me protect my peace, but let me make a note to bring this to my community for us to talk about. So probably the beginning of November, as happens many months of the year in music classrooms all over the country, music teachers who are seeking to be more diverse, more culturally responsive, more relevant to the learners that they have, they're looking at, well, what month is it and how can I bring music from the month that's being celebrated, so those cultural months. So mid-September to mid-October, there's a lot of talk about Hispanic Heritage Month. So how can I find music from Latin America, music from Spain, right, to bring into my, probably not Spain, but Latin America is usually where people are thinking about Latin American countries, should bring into their classrooms, right? And so November is Indigenous Peoples Month. And so a few weeks ago, I saw some posts in one of the Facebook groups that I am in with music teachers, and they were asking, what are some ways that I can respectfully bring Indigenous music into my classroom? And I love that this person was asking, how can I do it respectfully? Because there's a lot of conversation, especially when it comes to our Indigenous community, who has been stolen, taken from so many times. I appreciate that this teacher was asking, like, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it in a respectful way. I want to do it in a way that doesn't appropriates culture and honors, but I also don't know like where to start or what to do. So I appreciate what this teacher shared. And I thought this would be perfect because I was thinking of talking about how do we create culturally relevant curriculum without falling into the trap that I find so many music teachers, this teacher included, right? They were looking to be, in fact, I think they said, I want to be culturally inclusive, which I cringe when I hear that phrase because what does that mean, culturally inclusive? But that's an office hours for another day. So they were trying to be culturally inclusive by asking, what are some music, what are some activities from Indigenous communities that I can bring into my classroom? And there were some other questions I think that should have also have been asked, but I applaud this teacher for asking, how can I do it in a respectful way? And for asking, right? And not just Googling, finding something, and then just doing it without context, without at least trying to do their research and their homework. So I commend this teacher for trying to do the right thing. And it also got me thinking about that there's just so much confusion and so many misconceptions still about what culturally responsive pedagogical practice looks like. What does it entail? And so I want to start there before I jump into how do we design the rehearsal or the lesson plan? What does it look like? Let's make sure that we're all kind of drawing from the same knowledge well. And let's just talk about like what it even is, right? And so a lot of the confusion I think that happens is because, and I see it on the faces of teachers who are in my professional development sessions, my coaching sessions, when their idea of what culturally responsive teaching is or what it could look like in an arts classroom, a music classroom, a visual arts classroom, a dance theater, when their thought of what it should look like or what it could look like, or maybe even what it does look like in their classroom, right? I have many folks who attend like a conference session and they'll say, well, I'm just here because I know I'm already culturally responsive. I'm just trying to get some more tips. That may be true, but I have questions, right? So when the thought of what they have in their mind about what it is in their classroom, what culturally responsive teaching is, butts up against my research and the theory, and then the very practical ways that myself and I was looking the other yesterday, actually, I was running some numbers because as we get towards the end of the year, how many teachers has our work as a consulting firm reached, how many students, how many clients, right? And we're like nearing I think actually we're a little over 4,000 teachers. I have to look at the numbers again. It was another big number of the number of teachers that have engaged in our work that we've been able to support in a variety of different capacities, not literally 1-to-1, 4,000, that would be crazy. But I see it on the faces of the teachers, especially when they attend those sessions where it's a conference. It's open to a variety of different people, a variety of different experiences and backgrounds. And I see the dissonance on their face. It's like their brain is having a battle with what I'm presenting to them from the theory, the research, and the practical work that I do every day with my folks. And a lot of it stems from the confusion between like, what is a culturally responsive practice? What is it a culturally relevant pedagogical practice versus like multiculturalism or diversity in education? And so what culturally responsive teaching is not and I'll use my music teacher lens for these examples, it's not simply diversifying our repertoire and programming music by a Black, Brown, Indigenous, or Asian composer. That's great and wonderful. We want to do that. But if that's what you're only doing, that's actually not culturally responsive. That would be diversity, I would say. It's also not, let me look at my examples. Oh, it's not learning a piece in a different language. Okay, Jackie, it's not learning a piece in a different language, which is wonderful and is good for our students to do, but that's not culturally responsive. It's also not simply using a pop piece or a hip hop piece in your lesson or programming it on a concert and saying, now I'm being culturally responsive. All of those would be examples of what I would say would be like diversity in education, or hola to you too, man. Hope you're doing well. Or would be like a multicultural example, right? So oftentimes when I'm talking to teachers and we're having that conversation, the cognitive fight that's happening between what I'm presenting and what they think it is like, oh, I'm programming, Asian composers, female composers. I'm making sure that my students are having variety of languages that we're singing in our choir, for instance. I thought I was being culturally responsive because I'm picking the language that's their home language. These are wonderful things. also not culturally responsive. So in a nutshell, a very distilled down definition of culturally responsive teaching and culturally responsive education is that we are seeking to use the cultural frames of reference, that's the prior knowledge, experiences, interests of our students, but we're seeking to use those frames of reference to make the learning more effective and relevant for our students. That's like a very basic definition. And we're thinking about music. I'll use my music teacher lens here. I define culturally responsive music education. And in fact, it's actually the subject of my book. Let me grab it. If you're new to my community, you might not know, but I wrote a whole book about culturally responsive teaching and a practical guide, really, which is my book, Music as a Vehicle, for what this looks like and what it is. So I define in the book and in my work that I do that from a music standpoint, it's leveraging the prior knowledge, experiences, and interests of our young musicians in this case. So that's their cultural frames of reference. It's not just the color of their skin or their race, right? But we're leveraging their cultural frames of reference in order to work in partnership with them. So not doing the learning to them, but doing the learning together in a partnership, engaging them in relevant real world ways that people actually make music out in the real world, so that they can get understandings about themselves, about others different from them, and the world around them. Just happens that we use music as the vehicle for them to be able to do that. Music is the medium. And I would say that's the same for other arts disciplines as well. So how do we leverage the prior knowledge, experiences, and interests of our young visual artists, of our young dancers, our young theater artists to work in partnership, to engage them in relevant real world ways of engaging in that art form to help them develop these understandings. And we just do it through the medium of the arts, right? And you'll notice that in the bigger, broader, distilled down version of culturally responsive teaching I just gave, we want to use our students' cultural frames of reference to make the learning more relevant and effective. And that big, long definition I just gave you for culturally responsive music and arts education, nowhere in there are we talking about diversity of genre, diversity of composer. It's not about that, right? That's a separate kind of education, which is still important. But let's be clear, when we're saying we are centering a culturally responsive approach, which is my belief, that is how we pull the lever towards equitable access to high quality instruction in the arts for our students. Let's be clear about what we're talking about, right? So then the bigger question is, what does all of that look like in an actual lesson plan, in an actual rehearsal plan, right? And so in my book and in the work that I work with my clients and my teachers with, curriculum is actually the last thing that I delve into. It's actually the last part of the book. It's the last 3 chapters. Because before we can get to the curriculum piece, we first have to make sure that you are equipped with the lens to understand equity in the first place, that you can see where the policies perhaps that you are using in your music or arts program are presenting barriers and obstacles for students. We then have to make sure that the learning environment, the container, is primed for this kind of teaching and learning, very different than the kind of teaching and learning that a dominant narrative, and in the US, I'll use as an example, here in the US, there's a very dominant narrative about how teaching should look. The students should be sitting still and paying attention and listening to the teacher lecture on and on and on, right? Culturally responsive pedagogical approaches would have us teach and learn differently. So how do we create a learning environment that is focused on partnership, not on teachers having power over students? And then we get into what repertoire, how do we design the curriculum, what instructional strategies, and those things. So I thought it was important to kind of make sure we all have the same knowledge base before I jumped into the lesson part. Because what I don't want to have happen is you engage in this session in the office hours, or you watch the video of this office hours, and then this is the only takeaway, and you forget, like, and you don't know that there's so much more than just what I'm going to share with you in the next, 30 to 40 minutes, that however long it takes me to talk about this. And so let me know your questions or your thoughts about that also in the comments. I love to know, like, again, what is your role in education? I see a few other people have joined us. So join the conversation. Let me know what's your role in education, where you're tuning in from. And I also would love to hear, what are your thoughts or your experiences around, especially arts educators, since that's my focus. What are your experiences around what it looks like to create a culturally responsive music or arts program? And maybe what does it look like for some of your colleagues, or maybe you yourself have delivered a session at a conference or for your school or district or organization around culturally responsive teaching. Maybe you had some questions, some pushback. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about that as well. So join me and let me know a little bit. But let's talk about, what does it actually look like in the curriculum? That's what we're talking about, right? Lessons, rehearsal plans, that's the curricula piece. So let's talk about what that is. So first we have to think about like what is the ultimate goal of all education? Like forget music, forget arts, forget language arts, any specific discipline. What is the overall goal? Well, the overall goal of education is to equip a person with the knowledge and the skills to be able to actually like go out in the world and do stuff, right? So we want to teach students math concepts and math skills so that when they encounter a situation out in the real world that requires a mathematical understanding, they can pull from that learning that they've already had, right? Same thing with science, right? We want to teach kids and give them the knowledge, or people, right? Knowledge, because not only kids are learners, but knowledge, the skills, so that when they, when you experience something out in the real world that requires understanding of a science concept, you can pull from your science knowledge, right? Same thing in music, choir, band, a visual arts classroom, a dance classroom, a theater classroom. How can we teach concepts, elements, and skills such that when students are out in the real world and they encounter something, they have already been equipped with knowledge and skill to be able to navigate whatever that may be. The trap, I think, with us as arts educators that sometimes we can fall into, and I know myself as a music teacher early on in my journey of really figuring out how do I best create effective instruction for my students, sometimes we get so bogged down in the literal art form that we forget that the art form is a medium, it's a vehicle. Music as a vehicle, right? Is a vehicle for these bigger understandings. And so we develop our curriculum. This is what I support my clients with. And what I would advise you to is when we begin the process of creating, whether you're doing a whole K-12 curriculum for your school district or your organization, or you're just creating for your band, your high school band program or your middle school, elementary, general music, what have you, we got to start with remembering and understanding hey, Angelica, good to see you. Understanding that the eventual goal of all this learning and education is that kids can use the knowledge and use the skills that we are imparting them in the classroom out in the real world. So when we're thinking about as arts educators, what that might look like is instead of just thinking, good evening to you too, Angelica, instead of just thinking, let me think about how students can learn this. I don't know, I was a flute player. So how can my students perform this piece that requires a trill on the flute? How can they learn that technique? Instead, we want to think a little bit bigger, right? What is the purpose of this piece? Why am I teaching this piece? What is the real world connections that I'm going to make through and with this piece, such that when students, because I don't know that other than I don't perform as much as I would like to anymore, but I don't know that I use the trilling as a technique like in my real world ever unless I'm performing, right? So then what is the purpose of the trill, right? Hopefully that makes sense. A lot of times we build the curriculum around these specific concepts, specific elements and techniques. Instead, we want to think much bigger, right? So we want to think about big ideas, conceptual learning, such that we're not getting bogged down in the individual techniques and the individual, the half note or whatever have you. A lot of times when I work with teachers or when I'm just introducing this, right? Maybe I did a keynote or one of those short, 40-minute conference sessions. The reason why I get this question so much is because it can be hard for music teachers and arts teachers in general who've been taught our college prep, teacher preparation programs to teach these techniques, which I would say are like small ideas. It's hard then to think bigger, right? Because maybe you've never thought about, well, what's the point of a trill? Like, what would a flute player use the knowledge that they're gaining about the trill in their real life, right? If you've ever thought about that, that can be a difficult kind of exercise, but a worthy one. Because once you start thinking in bigger ideas and conceptual understandings versus like the small individual techniques and concepts, it's hard. Like I can't not think big. It's harder for me now to think the other way because I see instances in my real life all the time of where, wow, that would be a great music lesson actually, right? Because I know a piece of music that I could use to connect to that concept that is actually something in real life that my kids would use. Yeah, we've got to think bigger than the small concepts, right? That's the first thing, because again, the small concepts are not necessarily what the students are going to use out in the real world, but they are going to use the conceptual understandings. And really, when we think about these conceptual understandings, so a conceptual understanding might be like change, identity, voice, right? Like these bigger understandings. And then we find ways to still teach the techniques, the skills, the concepts, right? Through our, our visual art curriculum, our theater curriculum, our music curriculum. But we use these bigger ideas as the anchor, and then the techniques and the other things, they just support the learning, right? It gives the big concept gives us a reason why we need to learn the trill on the flute, or why we need to learn pointillism in visual art, or something like that, right? But for a student who is seeking connection, as all humans are, and we're seeking to see like what's the real point of why my art teacher is teaching this, they need to know why they're learning the thing. How in their real life are they going to actually use the concept that you're teaching? And so we have to start there first, right? Sometimes that's the hardest hurdle I find when working with my clients, or even individual teachers who are desiring to move their curriculum to center and support a culturally responsive pedagogical approach. Sometimes the first big hurdle is, how can I help them, coach them to think bigger and conceptually, and then to get into the smaller things. And so if you don't already have my book, Music as a Vehicle, that's actually there's 3 chapters on the curriculum piece. And I'll share this also with you. So I know in the future, I'll write probably a whole book just on the curriculum piece. And many of the chapters are actually written because I actually had to cut quite a bit out just to make the book, streamlined, because I knew the book was going to be just the first of many books, right? But I highly suggest, if the concept of like, how do we make this work in the lessons and the actual literal what I'm going to get in front of my students and teach them on a day-to-day basis, if that's something that you're interested in, definitely make sure you grab the book, because those three chapters, I get pretty deep in the idea of how do we move away from the smaller thinking to real world concept based learning, and then how do we back into it, right? So if I'm thinking of and if you have an example you want me to work through, drop it in the chat or comments, and I would love to work through an example like live with you if you'd like to. But if we're thinking of something like change, right, and we're thinking of our repertoire, or we're thinking of, if you're a visual arts teacher, you're thinking of maybe an art project that you want your students to engage in because of the specific art techniques, we think of the bigger enduring understanding, if you will, that we want students to walk away from. So I don't want my students to walk away from I don't know, let's use change, right? I don't want my students to walk away from a unit on change just learning, some songs, and we learn dynamic changes, great. I want them to walk away understanding that change is present in all these different areas of their life, right? Change can be present in your thinking. Change can be present in the weather. Change can be present in your ability and your skills that progress, right? Change is a part of life that sometimes as human beings we push back against, but it's also inevitable, right? So how can my students walk away with that understanding about themselves, right? About how they maybe experience change and maybe the discomfort of change in certain instances, how other people have handled change, what change looks like maybe in systems and different things that happen out in the world. How can I use my repertoire to then support their understanding of the change? And then, by the way, I'm going to pick repertoire that's going to have the specific techniques and concepts that I need them to learn. They got to learn the half note. They need to learn the trill. I'll use that example again, right? I pick pieces that have those concepts in it, but also support my students with gaining the bigger understanding that is actually that's going to be what they remember, right? They may not remember in 10 years exactly about the half note, but they'll remember about learning about change because it was actually something in their real life that they were able to engage with and to understand and to kind of like dig around in, right? So how do we start there, right? Because again, effective instruction is instruction that students will actually use out in the real world, helps them better understand themselves, right? Other people, how the world works, systems, and things like that. Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, if you've seen her theory of culturally relevant pedagogy, whenever I've seen her talk, she always uses this equilateral triangle, right? We want students to, of course, gain the discipline-specific information. That's the student learning, academic achievement. Us in the arts, that's the artistic process, right? How are we helping students to perform, create, respond, and connect, right? So all of those nitty-gritty arts process things. How are we doing that? How are we also helping them to develop cultural competence, not just for other people different from them, but also for themselves, right? I think sometimes we miss that part of cultural competence is also you being competent enough about your own culture. And again, culture isn't just race or color of skin. It's all the multifaceted, wonderful things that make you who you are, right? So all the pieces of your identity, and then the identities of others. And then the real world part, I like to call it the so what, is the socio-political consciousness. This often is where we are helping students to be able to critically analyze and think about the things that they're experiencing, right? So the example I love, because often we think of social political consciousness as like the really heavy race and gender and socioeconomics, and it is those things, but it's also things that we encounter in everyday life that's so normalized in our society, which is another problem, right? But it's so normalized that we can't even see it, right? So like the holidays that your school or district might celebrate, but also the holidays that your school or district doesn't celebrate, right? This week, many schools and districts are having days off from school or whole weeks off from school. Some people to celebrate or to observe, I should say, in the US, the Thanksgiving holiday, which of course is tomorrow. But then we can also think about there's lots of religious holidays, Christian religious holidays that are embedded in the school district schedule. Either they are directly said. I always think it's funny. Sometimes they don't. It's not said this. We're taking Easter off, but the way spring break is lying on your school district calendar clearly is allowing there to be time off for around the Easter holiday, right? So it's so embedded in our system. We don't even think about how the calendar and the holidays and the days off are affected by the lens of the person who created those things, right? And why is it that some holidays get to have days off, and some people who celebrate those holidays, like you don't have to miss a day of school, but maybe if you are somebody whose school district calendar reflects more Christian holidays, but maybe you're Muslim or maybe you're Jewish, and you have to take days off from school or days off of work to be able to observe holidays that are important to you, right? That's also a social political understanding and a social political topic as well. And so there's everyday things that are baked into our systems and societies that we want to make sure our students understand. The question is, how do we design our music rehearsals and our lessons, our arts, lessons and rehearsals to help students to be able to do those things, right? So first, we have to think bigger. Conceptual understanding. What's the real world reason why we would want to do this or learn this? And then we got to think about, well, that's the bigger understanding. But what's my goal for what my students will do? So for instance, let me think of an example. For instance, let's use a music ensemble instance. A lot of times for ensemble directors, whether you're a choir director or a band director, oh, Angelica's saying that you just had that conversation with the student. Yes. How do we help students to respect everybody's holidays when not everybody's holiday is even like getting the respect on like the calendar that our school has established, right? Like that's also a question that we have to wrestle around with, and that we need to make sure that our students like have the lens to be like, yeah, why is it that some holidays are on the calendar and days are off? But then for other people, they have to, I remember in my school district, you could get those days off and it didn't affect your personal leave, but it was like a lengthy process. You had to fill out these forms and submit it. There was all these things. It's like some people don't have to do that, right? So why is that happening? And I think that's wonderful that you have that conversation with the student, because we all need to be having that conversation and then similar social political conversations in our curricula when we are intentionally designing it to support a culturally responsive and relevant approach. Our curricula can be a really wonderful tool, a vehicle, if you will, to help us to be able to do those things, right? So let me know if anything else is resonating over here with my folks on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. I want you to be in part of the conversation too. So if anything's resonating, let me know. Or if you have questions, I'm just talking. I have some notes here, but I'm mostly just talking. Yeah, so the first thing is we're thinking about what does the actual design of the curricula or the daily lesson plan, the daily rehearsal plan look like? We first need to think bigger, right? So when you're thinking bigger, you can't think at the individual daily lesson level. A lot of times that's a big mistake I see music teachers make. I think my visual art teacher friends do a better job of this because often they're thinking already in projects. But as music teachers, we struggle with this because we're trying to just survive day to day to day. I remember that life. I'm just trying to make it from Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday. Maybe I'm just trying to make it from my first period class to my second period class. So I get it. Sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. But at some point, we have to move away from just trying to survive, right? We got to thrive, like Dr. Bettina Love says. How do we make sure that we're not just surviving our day to day, but really thriving and allowing our children to thrive in our classrooms by creating curricula that is intentionally backwards planned. So we can't keep planning day to day, lesson to lesson, rehearsal to rehearsal. We actually do need to know, like, where are we going long term? So when we think about maybe change or voice as the big concept, and we're picking, maybe repertoire for our concert. I'll use ensemble as an example. Our choir concert, we're picking repertoire for that. We're picking repertoire that will both help us to explore the bigger idea of change or voice, or I don't know, I'm blanking out on other things. I have a whole list in my book of different conceptual big ideas, but thinking about the big idea, we'll pick repertoire that'll allow us to really dig around with what that might be. We'll have a good essential question, a good understanding. And that repertoire also allows us to teach the concepts, the elements, the techniques, the choir things, right? Because of course we're still teaching all of those. But then I find that sometimes, again, we're teaching rehearsal to rehearsal. We have to think about long term. So think from the beginning, instead of just what is my concert programming going to be, when my students do like put on this concert, by the end of all these rehearsals and all this learning, we get to the concert, what is the actual understanding, the learning I want them to walk away from, whether that's like directly music related, or better, it's connected to that big idea, that big concept, right? So how am I helping them to walk away from that? And I know sometimes this ruffles my choir director, my band and orchestra director friends' feathers when I say this. The goal really shouldn't be to perform a concert. If your goal is to just perform a concert, that is not culturally responsive teaching. That's the only goal that you have. Now, I'm not saying don't have a concert. What I'm saying is, if your goal, right, you're thinking about your rehearsal, your concert programming plan from maybe you're starting in October, preparing for your December concert, right? Although a lot of us are getting ready for, this is a busy time, right, for music teachers everywhere, is we're getting ready for our winter concerts in December or January. I usually did my concerts in January to avoid the crunch of December, right? But you're preparing in October, you're thinking about December, you're thinking about the repertoire, and you're thinking about, I got to perform a concert on December 11th, right? If that's the only goal, you've missed all of the whole point of culturally responsive teaching. How are we making the learning relevant and effective for the students through their cultural frames of understanding, right? Performing a concert is not that. However, preparing to put on a concert, there's many, many opportunities for us to be able to do that when we are intentional, right? So instead of thinking, our rehearsal yesterday, we hit these pieces and these parts of the pieces, and now this is what's next. Let's think about the eventual end. So I'll give you an example. So I shared with you earlier, and if you've been with me, you know this, right? I was a music teacher for 12 years. I taught K through 12. I taught actually preschool through 12, but primarily I taught elementary. That was interesting when I taught preschool. I love teaching preschool. That was actually a really fun time. But I taught primarily elementary, K through 6. General music. Oh, hey, Reimage LLC. I think that is my friend from North Carolina, right? I just followed you today. I actually was thinking of you about math and culturally responsive teaching today. I don't know why I was thinking about that, but anyway, thank you for joining me. And I was thinking about my concerts that I did many years with my elementary choirs. Oh, that's what I was saying. I taught general music K through 6. But then I also taught choir. 4th, 5th, and 6th graders were in my choir. And one of the concerts that we did, not the same concert, but very similar, multiple times that we did, was around the use of the understanding, I guess, really, of how different people create community understandings together. The first time I put this kind of conceptual idea together for a concert, I remember it was because I had a new group of kind of choir students. I think it was the year that I added 4th grade choir to my group. And so I was thinking about, how can I establish community with these students where we have different grade levels happening. My 5th and 6th graders, some of them actually were together the previous year. Actually, all of them were together the previous year, right? My 6th graders were together when they were in 5th grade. My 5th graders were together in a different way when they were in 4th grade, but now we have this whole group together. And I was thinking, how can I establish community with these kids that have different perspectives coming into the choir? Some students already had experience, right? They were already in the choir the year before. And then I had these 4th graders. This was their first choir experience. And I was trying to think of, like, what does that mean? What can I do to use the music as a vehicle to be able to create this community space? And so I thought immediately of different pieces of repertoire that would allow me to be able to do this. And one of the pieces, and really became like the cornerstone when I did it multiple times, that I didn't always use the same repertoire for this kind of conceptual concert, but I always used this song as like our cornerstone, was lift every voice and sing. And I thought of it because it itself is such a powerful example of the Black community. Again, how can I create community with these students? That was the bigger idea. And so the goal really wasn't to perform the concert at the end of this. The goal was for my students to explore our like individual identities and assets that we brought to the choir, as well as how, because all of our individual identities and assets are different, how it actually strengthens our choir. Our choir is better because we have all these wonderful different voices that are different and bring different strengths, right? And so I felt like Lift Up a Voice and Sing always helped us to kick off that conversation really well. And then we picked other pieces. So one year I had students that were really interested in, well, I often had students that were Spanish speaking. And so I had lots of different pieces. So I know we had, um, oh, La Bonita Bandera, the Puerto Rican kind of rally call. I know we did that one year. What's Born This Way, Lady Gaga, we did that one year. Different things, right? Ways to explore different identities, but also community, right? So like how can we talk about the LGBTQ community at large, but also like for us individually? How can we talk about the Puerto Rican community, but also us individually and things like that? So those pieces allowed us to have those conversations. And then of course we learned about triple meter with Lift Every Voice and Sing. We learned about harmony. We learned about dynamics and like we learned all the music things, but the music itself was the vehicle to allow us to have these deeper conversations. And because my goal was not to perform the concert, that was one of the byproducts, right? My goal was for my students to walk away from this learning having better understood themselves, better understood each other, better understood the world and how some of these things showed up. My goal was not for them just to perform. My goal was all these other things. So I had to think about, well, if that's my goal is for them to have these other understandings about community, about individual identities, strengthening community, how am I going to assess that? How do I assess their understanding of that? And so the assessment really wasn't the concert. The assessment was my students being able to put together, many people do this, directors, where they stand in front of the group and they talk to the audience about the process of how they learned or history or whatever. And instead, I thought that would be a really great opportunity for my students to kind of synthesize the conversations that we had been having over these many weeks and months leading up to the concert. And it would be the way for me to assess their understanding of the bigger idea, which was the community piece, the individual identities coming together. Oh, thank you, Angelica. It was one of my favorite experiences was when I had groups that I felt like this was a good conceptual idea for a concert to do. I didn't do it every year, but every few years I did this. And one of my favorite things that I put together, because it was truly different every time, because the kids drove what repertoire we chose. They drove the conversations. And so it was always so just so fun for me to kind of see how it would come to fruition and unfold each time. So I'm glad that resonated with you too. But anyway, so the students synthesizing our conversations and our discussions around the bigger idea, which is how do our individual identities contribute to the strength of our community. So they worked in small groups and pairs to talk about the different pieces, and they kind of put together like what is the kind of like the run of show going to be. So who's going to introduce the pieces? Who's going to talk about what? How is that going to look throughout the concert? Usually we did like 5 pieces. So how is that going to look like throughout this? And actually, that was my assessment. My assessment actually wasn't the concert. I should say that was my summative assessment. The formative assessment was, of course, all the individual musical concepts and things. I'll talk about that in a second. But my summative assessment was really, how can my students use our what they've learned throughout this unit and kind of synthesize it into these like audience things that we shared. And then our concert programs, we had like short snippets of what they were going to share was also part of the program, so that the audience members could also read about the different things. That was really the summative assessment, because they had to use both their knowledge about the music itself that we were performing, the different pieces, as well as the bigger understandings that I was wanting them to gain, right? So how did learning Born This Way help us to explore a particular community, and what effect does that have on us as individuals in our bigger choir community? So that was actually the summative assessment. And so because I knew that and I devised that, I then had to work backwards. So what did the individual lessons look like? Well, I had to kind of decide if at the end we're going to have this concert, and the concert is going to have us perform the pieces, but the students are also going to own the discussion and sharing our process, I got to like figure out how do I work backwards from that so I know where to start. And so I made a list, and I would encourage you, if you're, as you're thinking through how do I do this, make a list of all the different, and I walk you through that in my book, by the way, all the different things that the students will need to know, be able to do, understand, right? So what knowledge, what skills, and what understandings do they need to gain along the way? And then you put them in order, right? So if there's 8 things that they need to learn in order to get to that summative assessment, that ultimate goal, then you got to make the list of the 8 things and then put the 8 things in the correct order so that you know what lessons you need to do. So if I know in order for us to perform Lift Every Voice and Sing, my students need to have an understanding of triple meter, that's going to be a lesson. And in fact, that'll be a formative assessment, right? So that lesson, that rehearsal that we are engaging in the work around understanding triple meter and performing it, being able to read it in our octavo or a passage of it, which by the way, Lift Every Voice and Sing is a great example of triple meter is the exact same figure over and over again. It's actually very easy. If you're just introducing students to triple meter, there's a recommendation for you. It's very straightforward for the A section and part of the B section too. It's very accessible for students who are just learning to read in triple meter. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. So I know that that's going to be one of the elements that students need to know and understand. So I'm going to put that as one of our lessons, and that'll be a formative assessment. So I work backwards, right? If I know that this is the goal, I work backwards, I put all those things in order, and that's what our individual lessons look like. The trap, I guess I don't want to say trap, but oh, hey, Tanya, kind of a trap that I find that teachers fall into that I myself did oftentimes. In fact, this is what I wrote in my newsletter to my list last week is we want to do all the things all the time. We want every lesson to have a cultural competence goal, a performing goal, a connecting goal, a responding goal, a creating goal, a social political consciousness, a cultural like all the things. And we want to do it in 30-minute lesson or a 45-minute rehearsal, right? Now, as I said before, we need all of those things because that's part of how we create a curriculum that's going to support culturally responsive teaching, but we're not going to do it all at once, right? So like I just said, if I know what my goal is, I list out all the like micro goals, I guess you could say, of the things that the students need to know, understand, be able to do in order to get to that goal. And within all those micro goals, you're going to have what's the bigger social political goal for this unit, right? What's the bigger cultural competence? Maybe there's a couple of cultural competence goals, right? Those will happen along the way. They don't need to all happen in one 30-minute lesson or one 45-minute rehearsal. Besides the fact that that is not reasonable to think that you can create that in a meaningful way that allows students to process and practice within that lesson, the kids are also not going to be able to process and practice. And so if they're not processing the information, they're not practicing the information, their brain literally can't hold on to it, right? So instead, like I said, we think backwards, right? So, and that's Lift Every Voice and Sing example. I'm trying to remember, I don't know why I'm blanking out, but I'm forgetting the name. I have like a name for that concert conceptual program, and I am like really forgetting what it is. If I remember what it is, it's probably in the book's examples if you have it. But if I know that for that particular thing, one of the social political goals was for us to explore how, because we looked at like anthems and themes of different communities, right? We looked at how anthems and things like it. I'm thinking like, like the Star Spangled Banner is an example of a national anthem. But like community, like songs that you hear, when you hear it, you think of like a particular community, particular identity, right? These like rallying call kinds of pieces of music, anthems. Why is it that anthems are sometimes, why do they feel that way, right? For one thing, why do some pieces feel like a rallying call for that community? But then also, how are anthems used as propaganda, both in positive and negative ways, right? So how do systems use anthems in order to kind of like push an agenda on people? And so because I knew that that was our social political goal, I wanted students to explore through the music and through our learning, I had to make sure I baked that into our lessons, right? So we wouldn't tackle that in one lesson, we would draw that out, right? So again, because I know where my eventual goal with the concert program was, I worked backwards, right? And so I included that within one of the, I think it was maybe multiple times throughout several different lessons. but I'm able to place it in a way that allows us to really kind of process through that, have the deep, rich discussion, explore what it looks like in different pieces of music, and also to then for the students to be able to practice identifying, well, maybe what kind of agenda is being pushed in this particular song versus what maybe agenda is being pushed in this other song, right? And so again, we don't want to throw everything into one 30-minute lesson, one 45-minute rehearsal. When we think backwards from that big goal, we break it down into all the small goals. Now we can have our individual lessons that allow us to really work through these things with our students in a way that will allow them to process and practice. And that brings me then to kind of the last thing I wanted to share when we think about how do we design our day-to-day rehearsals and lesson plans in a way that will support a culturally responsive and relevant approach to teaching, is then we have to look at the individual lessons. How are we working with how the brain learns, right? So how are we thinking about the understandings we have of our students, right? Their prior knowledge, experiences, and their interests. How are we using those frames of reference to hook them into the learning? Because no learning can happen until they're engaged. So how are you going to hook them into the engagement of the lesson first, using what you already know about them and understand? That's the learning environment piece I touched on a little bit earlier, is that we make sure that we include that as part of what we are doing. So how do I hook them? How do I make it really clear what we're learning, right? So which of the 8 micro goals or whatever, I'm forgetting what I called it. Which of those 8 micro goals are we focusing on today? Why is that important? How can we work through it together, right? I do, we do kind of situation. How do we then practice and give our students time and space in the lesson to practice whatever that might be? So that might be, okay, our goal today was to really get into the social political part. What is the activity going to look like to help students to be able to practice through that? Or maybe the goal was to work on triple meter. How are we going to allow space for students to practice that right in the lesson in order for them to walk away, not just with, you blasting knowledge and information at them, but for them to really get in there to make the learning effective, right? That's what's meant by culturally responsive. We use what we know about our learners, we leverage that to make the learning effective, but we still have to use effective learning moves that allow them to process effectively so that they can, when they come back to us in the next rehearsal, they are not like, sometimes I remember this would happen to me where maybe I did too much in the prior lesson or the prior rehearsal, and it would feel like I didn't teach at all the prior time. Like I know I taught you this music, but because I fire hosed so much at them, they didn't process it. So they came the next rehearsal and essentially I had to start over. And if you've ever experienced like, man, I feel like I've already like defined this element, we've already done this, done it again, like they're not seeming to like latch onto it. There was no effective information processing that happened, right? So we look at what's happening in the day-to-day lessons and the strategies that you're using to make sure that students are processing the information, practicing it, so that in their brain, it's in their long-term memory, not just their short-term memory. So considering what does that look like? And again, in my book, I have some specific strategies and things as far as what does that look like and examples as well. So let me know. I know I have a couple more people that have joined in the time that we've been on for tonight's office hours. Thank you so much for jumping on and for listening. But I'd love to kind of hear what's resonating with you, what thoughts you have. What is your experience, right? I started off this evening talking about sometimes the dissonance that happens with what we thought was culturally responsive teaching, especially in the arts context. And maybe sometimes even we thought we were doing culturally responsive teaching, then to realize maybe there's some opportunities that we have to implement more with more fidelity for what really culturally responsive teaching is. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about that. But then also today is really about how do we design the lessons, right? What does it look like to create lessons and a curricula that will support a culturally responsive and relevant approach to teaching in music and the arts. So I'd love for you to share with me your thoughts. If you're watching the replay, feel free to share your thoughts also in the comments as well, because I'd love to hear what you think. So while you're doing that, oh, if you have any questions too, while you're doing that, let me share with you a couple of things that we have coming up. And then let me know in the comments any questions or just anything that's resonating with you. So 2 things I want to share with you. First of all, of course, if you don't already have my book that just released last month, Music as a Vehicle, a practical guide to implementing culturally responsive teaching in today's music classrooms. I was just doing the count yesterday. How many now? I think we're nearing around like 230 or so copies sold. So join the 230 or so people who have already grabbed their copy. It's available at musicasavehicle.com. And that has all the information about how you can get the paperback copy, which I have my own copy right here. We also have an ebook copy that's available as well. So I know some people like to have their books available to them electronically so they can keep all their books together. We have both the paperback and the ebook version. So make sure you grab your copy. It's a great holiday gift for yourself or for a music teacher that you know. I also have, because of course the book is from my perspective as a music teacher, but I also work with art teachers, visual art teachers, dance teachers, theater teachers with my partnerships with my school district and organization clients. Where more often than not, I'm working with visual and performing arts department, not just music teachers. But I've had a couple of folks who are not music teachers purchase the book because many of the ideas, while I'm coming from a music teacher lens, much of what I share in the book is also very applicable to the other arts content areas as well, because I didn't invent culturally responsive teaching. I wish I did. That'd be awesome, right? But I did not invent it. I'm just sharing in this book a specific framework and my approach to how do we implement it with fidelity, specifically with how it looks in the music context. And often for arts teachers, a lot of what our experience as music teachers and arts teachers are very similar, right? So I have a few people that are like visual art teachers and some theater teachers that have grabbed a book for themselves, and I'm curious to hear what their thoughts are as they read through the book. So grab one for yourself, get one for a gift for a friend. If you're an advocate, get it for your people. The book is a great place to start. The other thing I want to share with you that we have coming up is my webinar series is back. I am so excited. Because of the book, I had to kind of put many other things on hold. And so if you've been with me in my community for a while, I used to do monthly webinars. I do probably 2 or 3 in a series at once, and then maybe take a couple months off and then do another one. But this year, with the book needing to take up so much of my space, and then I'm still running a whole consulting firm over here, I just did not have the space to do the webinars. But I'm so excited that my next webinar, From Theory to Practice, Creating a Culturally Responsive Music Program, which is going to be actually a series of webinars. It's going to be, the series is called From Theory to Practice, and then like the second half is going to be all these other things, which will probably be I'm thinking it might be either a 5 or a 6-part series, but the first installment will be December 11th, which is just another couple weeks. I'm going to do, which is a Wednesday. I'm going to do basically the first one is going to be kind of an overview and a little bit getting deeper into the 4 main parts of my framework, which is also found in the book. And then the other webinars that I'll do in January, I'm going to do a curriculum one where I'm going to get a little deeper into curriculum. So if what I shared tonight piqued your interest, I'm going to get deeper in January's webinar will be about curriculum, and then I believe February is going to be about the equity mindset, and then so on and so forth. But the December 11th webinar is coming up in just a couple of weeks. It's free. It's a free experience to come and join me. We're going to be on at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can register now if you go to my website, ashleycuthbertson.com. If you're on Instagram, the link to be able to register is in my bio. And then I'm going to also drop the link over here for Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. But if you just go to my website, the link is right there on the first page. So if you just go to ashleycuthbertson.com, that's where you'll be able to get the link to be able to do that. From Theory Practice. And I would love to have you there. We have about 52 people, I think, when I looked earlier today, are registered. And I'd love to have some more folks as well. If you've been with me for a webinar before, come on back, right? Because I always have new things to share and new insights and new angles. One new thing that will be in this webinar, besides just really the whole webinar is new, but one particular thing is, I've now been working with clients all across the country, teachers, coaches, schools, districts, organizations, everybody, for now almost 2.5 years. I officially founded my company in June of 2022, but really even before, like I would say kind of like the beginning of 2022, so really almost 3 years that I've been doing this work. Today I posted, I counted all the different sessions that I've done, conferences, workshops, webinars, coaching sessions, all kinds of different things. Not even including when I go live. So who knows how many it is, but even just with like conference sessions, presentations, coaching sessions, workshops, it's a little over 150. I think it was 153, but that was a weird number. So I put 150 plus. workshops everywhere. And I have seen some very clear, like, I don't want to say levels, but very clear things that are happening with teachers who I would say are like at a beginning experimenting level with culturally responsive teaching in their music and arts classroom. There's like a different set of things that are going on with teachers who are more at like the implementing stage. And then there's a separate set of things happening with teachers who are at more of what I would call like a refining stage, right? And so in the webinar theory from theory to practice in December, that's going to be something I have not shared that with anybody yet because I haven't really felt like I had enough data to be able to kind of like back up that assertion that there's like three very separate, really four, because then there's people who have not engaged in the work at all. And then there's the three kind of different personas of folks who are engaging in the work, but like I said, in different kinds of ways. And so I'm excited to kind of delve into that a little bit more along with the framework that I'll be sharing with. So make sure you register and join. Yes, there will be a replay. It'll be available for a limited time afterwards. I know it's right in the middle of concert season for us music teachers. So if you're not able to come live, make sure that you still register because everyone on the list will get the link to the replay, which will be available. Awesome. So that's the two things I got for you. So if you don't already have your copy of Music as a Vehicle, make sure you grab your copy for yourself, for a friend. Paperback or ebook is on my website, musicasavehicle.com, and then register for my next webinar, which will be on December 11th, From Theory to Practice, Creating a Culturally Responsive Music Program. And then I see we have some questions. Oh, no, but I think she would be just left. But I see we have some questions. So I'll answer Tanya's question, and then hopefully Tanya will come back because I feel like, oh, maybe she's here. I see like the number is going up and down. So Tanya asked, when working with high school students, how do you give them the opportunity to share their opinions about teaching strategies that are most effective? I love this question. And so when we think about a culturally responsive approach, right, we want to leverage the cultural frames of reference of our students, their prior knowledge, experiences, interests, and then we have to work in partnership with them. So it can't be, I know you have the book, Tanya, so you've probably read this in it's either chapter 4, 5, or 6. Like now I'm forgetting which one it's in, but it's in one of either 4, 5, or 6 where I talk about we don't want to work in power over our students. We want to work in power with them. Part of working in power with our students is that we have to get their opinions about what is effective and what's not. And with high school students, there's even more opportunities. I'm thinking about my lens as a teacher working with elementary students. Sometimes the way I got their feedback with elementary kids, and this could work with high school too, and I did with my high school students when I taught high school level age students, was asking for them to let me know, in today's lesson, here was our goal. How do you feel like we did with that goal? Give me a simple, thumbs up, side, or down. For little kids, that's a super easy way to do it, but also for older people. And I want to say in my trainings with adults, I think I do that sometimes too. Like, just give me a quick signal of how you feel like you did towards the goal. And then the other part of that is, because I don't want you just to put a thumbs up, because it's very easy to not even be paying attention and just like put a thumbs up. Then I want the students to talk with me about, well, how do you feel like you met the goal? What did we do in today's lesson that allowed you to be able to give me a thumbs up? Or if you're giving me a thumbs to the side, what do you feel like you still need in order to be able to get from a thumb to the side to thumb up next time we have class? Or if you feel like you're here, thumbs down, if you're not feeling like you're understanding, what do you feel like you might need that would help you to make this more better and effective with you, right? You could do that with literally, I did that with 5-year-old students. You could do that with high school students. With high school students, they can type and write a little better than some of my little friends when I was teaching elementary school. Surveys are a great way to get their opinions about how things work. And the nice thing about surveys, especially with that age group, is you see the answers, their classmates don't see the answers. So that could be a simple 1-question exit ticket on the way out of the classroom door. It could be either like a physical survey that they write and they like hand it to you on the way out the door. I did that sometimes with students when I just needed a quick data piece. Or you could do it electronically with a Google Forms survey or something similar where it's like a 1-question survey where you ask them that same question I did before. Do you feel like you met today's goal and what helped you to be able to do that? That gives you the feedback to know like what hit with the kids, what didn't hit with the kids. Because maybe you tried something new. Maybe you tried a new strategy that you don't normally do. And it was amazing, right? And they want you to do it more. Now you have the feedback to hear from them that, yes, that actually worked well. And they want you to do it more. Or maybe you tried something and it didn't work. And that happens, right? And that's part of this process is you have to try things and they're not always going to be a a win every time. Then you have the little feedback from the kids to support why you should maybe do that strategy, or maybe why you should tweak it to have it be a little bit more effective for them, the next time that you come back around. So that thumb up, side down, surveys are a great way to do it as well. I'm trying to think of a third. You also could just have a discussion with them, right? The only reason I hesitate to give that as an option is the trouble with discussions around opinions and things about this specifically is that once one student shares their opinion, another student who maybe has an opposing opinion, sometimes there's like the peer pressure, especially at that age level, to maybe not share their true thoughts or feelings because now it's contrary to their classmates. So you might not get totally 100% transparent, honest answers. So sometimes I find sometimes discussions are not super helpful in this particular instance, Tanya, that you're asking about. Ways to do it where kids can privately share or, like on your chest. It's not a big deal. I find to be a little bit better than just having an all-out discussion. But the feedback forms, either written on a slip of paper, the electronic surveys, give me a thumbs up, side or down, and then have a discussion about, well, why I see you gave a thumbs down. Tell me what would have been more effective for you today, or what didn't work for you today. Would be things that I would say would work for them. Let me know if that answers your question. And hey, Isaiah, I see you popped in. I don't know if you're still here, but I saw Isaiah pop in from New Jersey. Good to see you. And then I see you over here watching YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. Let me know who you are, because I can see on Instagram who people are, but I can't see who you are over here. So let me know. I see you watching. I love to be able to acknowledge you by name as well. So let me know if you have any other questions. I know you're very welcome, Tanya. Let me know if you have any follow-up or any other thoughts about that. Any other questions? I know I try to keep this to about an hour, but I could chat about this all day. I know it's also I guess it's a holiday evening, right? If you're a teacher, you probably don't have school tomorrow. I hope you don't. Hopefully you have the holiday off. But any other questions? I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is I'm not super formal with the office hours. I don't have like a grand master plan. I'm basically thinking as the weeks come what the topic is going to be. Like I had today's idea. Well, I guess I kind of had today's idea a couple of weeks ago, but it was an idea that I was going to talk about either in a post or newsletter or like this. But I wasn't really sure I was going to come on and talk about this specific topic. So let me know what you would like for me to talk about next week. Let me check my calendar. I'm pretty sure I already put on my calendar to make sure I come back next Wednesday, same time, same place. Yep. So I'll be here, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern on all the places. Let me know what you'd like to talk about. Last week, what was last week? Last week was 3 ways to avoid performative diversity when you're choosing repertoire. And so then today was about designing lesson plans and rehearsal plans the culturally responsive way. So maybe next week we haven't talked about learning environment. So maybe something in regards to learning environment might be good for next week, or something around, how do we develop the lens for equity, cultural proficiency, critical self-reflection. That might be a good topic for next week. So let me know. I'd love to talk about a topic next week that you're got a burning, desire for me to talk more about, and for us to have conversation around. So you can drop that in the comments. You can send it to me as a DM. If you're on my email list and have my email, send me an email. I really do read all of those emails. Somebody, was it last week or earlier this week? Somebody said to me, oh, you must have like a whole person that like creates all of these social media graphics and emails. And I said, no, I am still my own social media manager and email manager. I am the communications manager over here. So I read all the emails. So let me know what your NDM. So let me know what topics you want me to discuss for next week. I don't see any other questions. So I'll hang on for like 30 more seconds. So last call for any other questions or takeaways, right? Like if you don't have a question, drop in the comments. What is your biggest takeaway from what I shared today about how to design lessons, rehearsal plans in a culturally relevant way? What is your biggest takeaway? I'd love to know what you took away from our time. And if you are watching the replay, still leave it in the comments. I'd love to know what your takeaway was as well. But that's all I got for you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you again for coming on to my little corner of the internet and engaging in our office hours. My plan is to come every week, we'll see how often I can do that, but my plan is to come every week. So let me know what topics you want me to engage in. Don't forget to grab a copy of the book and make sure you register for December's webinar, From Theory to Practice, Creating a Culturally Responsive Music Program. It's free. Links are all over the place. So on my website, on all my pages, and also in my bio and on this video. So make sure you get registered so that you can be a part of that training that I'm going to do in another couple of weeks. But for now, I hope you have a wonderful, restful Thanksgiving with whoever and however you decide to spend tomorrow. I hope you have a wonderful day. I'm thankful that you came this evening and joined me. And I'll see you next week for the next edition of Office Hours. Bye.